much for that. Because we're a small group, we'd like to really keep it interactive. So what we'll do is we'll do a quick round of intros. Myself and Hannah will introduce ourselves. Then we'll run through some materials that we've prepared, and hopefully they can help you frame how to think about your pitch. And then really, guys, Q&A, And if at any point you want to jump in, if something's unclear or you'd like us to stop and or pause or go back to something, just ask. Because, the good thing about being a relatively cozy group is that we can do that even over Zoom. So let's make use of that. So without further ado, we are really excited to be here, to be speaking to you all. Hannah and I are setting up Houghton Street Ventures, which is a venture fund affiliated formerly with London School of Economics. We are both LSE alumni. We've come at kind of, where we are today slightly differently, so we'll each introduce ourselves separately, but we are both bonded by our love of the LSE ecosystem, by the talent that we see coming out of LSE, and by the wonderful ideas that you all have. That's really what motivates us to get out of bed every day and do what we do, because we see a fantastic opportunity here. And the most amazing thing about LSE is the help that that everyone offers each other. It's a real, it's an ecosystem which really does thrive on mutual support. So if I don't leave you with anything else today, if there's nothing that we say that it makes an impact, just remember that the best way to prepare for any of these pitches is to pitch to your friends, because the one thing LSE students always have been is very direct and very transparent, and there's nothing better than direct feedback and blunt feedback from good friends who just say, look, you need to shorten this, or I really don't get this. What we call, what's called in the industry, the mum test. If your mom doesn't understand what you do, that's not her fault. That means you're not explaining it well enough. So, call up that person who doesn't know anything about tech, or a friend who's studying something completely unrelated, and run this by them, because that's going to be the best place to start in terms of whether you're being effective. Because trust me, if they can't get what you do, neither will a judge at a competition or an investor speaking to you for the first time. And if you lose them in the first minute of that conversation, or first couple of minutes, you've kind of lost them. Anyway, I just gave you a preview instead of giving you a background. I studied an undergrad in economics at LSE, graduated in the last crisis. Living, breathing example of the fact that it's possible to get a job in a crisis, by hook or by crook. I ended up doing finance for a while, so basically was in banking, was at Morgan Stanley for 7 years, and was just very lucky to join at a time when Russian internet was blowing up. So the first two deals that I worked on were Mail.ru and Yandex, two of the biggest IPOs since Google. And then eventually I moved over to California, Menlo Park, and worked with Uber, Airbnb, Netflix, and other big tech corporates who were doing late stage fundraising. They seemed enormous to us at the time, but they got even bigger since I left the firm. So really, really exciting to have been there at that time. But honestly, the most exciting thing that California left me with was my first taste of angel investment, when I started investing in early stage companies, working with founders, and really seeing what passion they brought to their day-to-day, risking everything and trying to make a dream for themselves and for what they were building. So really excited to be speaking to you guys today and seeing some of the ideas that you have. I'll hand over to Hannah.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me, RJ, and everyone. Happy Friday. So I've had a slightly different path to where we are today. To Veronika, I started my career in international development out in India, working for the big foundation of a bank, and got really enamored by the idea of social enterprise and alternative ways to solve the world's problems. So came to LSE all hopeful and wide-eyed, and did my master's there and dreamt of going into impact investing, but instead fell into tech. So I've spent the last 8 years doing kind of various things in various corners of the startup venture world. So I ran the UK's Smart Cities Accelerator program for Canary Wharf Group, which took 36 companies through their paces over a 6-month period. So I have seen my fair share of pitch decks and been in pitch practice competitions. I tried to do my own startup after that, and had a lot of terrible pitching experience, which I think was what they call a learning experience. I learned what not to do and what to do better. I've been involved in with a lot of startups since. I've done a lot of corporate innovation, so seen companies pitch to the likes of EY and big banks, and alongside all of this, have worked very closely with LJ and Generate. I love this element of what Veronika and I do, and being able to be here supporting you. But in essence, I think, Veronika and I aren't by no means the final word, but we've seen our fair share of decks. So hopefully we'll be able to provide you with a few pointers that might help you along the way.
And just to double down on that, everyone is going to have a slightly different preference. You're not going to be able to please everybody. What we're going to speak to you about today is a framework that's loosely based on Guy Kawasaki's framework, the 10-slide kind of deck. The shorter generally is the better. You can convey a lot of things in 10 slides. He speaks about size 39 font and nothing smaller than, really, really big numbers, big bold colors, maybe because we're European, we're okay with smaller font, but effectively it doesn't need to be as bright and loud. But the principle is the same. Simplicity is your friend. If you can't get your point across if you can get your point across in fewer words, do, and really stick to the basics and repeat them often, and stick to really key metrics, and again repeat them often, because you need to make sure that things stick.
If you in thinking through your slides, make sure that on every slide there's one key takeaway. Try not to put a million points in one slide. So if you make sure that the major thing you want to say is being communicated clearly.
Exactly. So without further ado, how do we think about, what do we like to see when we see you guys pitch? The most important thing for us within the first, I would say, let's just go over the kind of the general components. So problem statement, why now? Basically, what is the problem and why not? What is the call to action? Why should we care about it now? Maybe the problem has been around for a while, but, and maybe now is actually not the time to solve it. One of the biggest reasons that tech companies fail is because they come to market too soon when there isn't a market available. So it's a really important part of your pitch. Your solution, of course, what are you proposing that's different? Your business model, your revenue model, those are slightly different. So the business model is, how you go after your customers. Your revenue model is how you actually make money off them. So there's different ways to present that. The market sizing, very important. Traction, any kind of traction. And this doesn't mean paying customers. It also means feedback from surveys, any kind of research that you've done. If you've mapped all of the business development leads at all the corporates that you need to speak to sell your B2B product, that's traction, because at least you've collected feedback from basically the people you're going to have to get on board to buy your product. Competitive landscape. So as I mentioned just a minute ago, if you're building something and it's visionary, that's fantastic. If there isn't a market for it, that's not so fantastic. And there are very few companies that can actually create a market for themselves. If you are one of those, that's brilliant, but very often investors like to see a competitive landscape because they want proof that there are actually people out there who are adjacent or have done something in this space. You can't just get away with saying no one's doing what I'm doing, because that's not going to work. Either it's basically going to turn off the investor completely. They will not believe that there's someone who hasn't thought of this already or something similar. That's just the way of the world. Most scientific discoveries have been made at similar times, and the person who ended up getting the credit was the one who published the paper first. So it's not a question of is anyone else doing something similar? There is somebody else doing something similar. The question is whether they're going to execute better than you, and that's where people differentiate. And then of course the team. Why are you the people qualified to bring this to the fore? And I would say, look, and we have this on the slide here, which we'll share the slide deck afterwards, so you don't need to kind of scribble down notes right now. But we would say the first two are non-negotiable. That's the starting point. If we don't know what the business does in the first 30 seconds to maybe 2 minutes of the presentation, you tend to lose people after that. They need to be hooked, because most investors are very time poor, and what they want to do is be able to start asking and formulating questions in their mind as you go through the rest of the pitch. If they're not able to do that because you haven't explained to them what you actually do, then they're going to get frustrated. And the last thing you want to do is frustrate someone so early on in the process, before you even had a chance to get to Q&A or to follow-ups. So, really do yourself a favor and start off with these 2 points. After that, everything else you can move around depending on how you prefer to tell the story, and what feels more organic or more natural to you.
I would add quickly, I would add one last one, which isn't on here, but it might be in the longer version, is on 8. If there were to be an 8, would be a roadmap.
Yeah.
So, what are you doing from now on, and what does that look like? Because to have an idea of actually how you're going forward and what milestones you're hoping to hit over the next kind of 6-12-month period is really helpful.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So opening statements, 30, 45 seconds, what do you do? What is the problem? What's your solution? And why now? And again, there's different ways to create a hook. It could be your area of expertise. It could be something that, you've been excited about since you were a kid and you just have a chance to solve now. Or very frankly, it could just be something that you've experienced, and you might have an emotional hook. You don't necessarily need expertise in an area to be able to solve a problem. If you have a very strong reason to go after a solution for something, either because you had a personal experience or an experience in your family or among your friend group of any kind of problem that you want to tackle, that's often a very good story to tell, because the biggest thing that investors solve for at this stage when you're so early is who you are, the team, and what your character is made of in terms of, do you have staying power of actually staying the journey of an entrepreneur? Because an entrepreneur's journey is not it's not a pitch competition. It's not 3 months. It's not even 12 months. It's 10 years from start to exit. It's 10 years of a long, hard slog, frankly. And at the end of that, you may see a return, you may not, and you need to be really passionate. It doesn't really matter how you bring that passion, what really motivates you to do what you do, but you need to have that drive. And so any which way to demonstrate it early on is really good. It's a good place to start. Hannah, anything to add on this one?
No, I would just say, just to bear in mind that when we have 3 things on a slide, it doesn't mean that should just be one slide, in case that's a stupid comment.
No, not I mean, really, it's up to you guys how you organize. We would just recommend that you don't go over 10 or 15 pages, depending on how much time you have to present, because, a slide deck at this stage should really not be 20 pages. It's a lot of things for people to read. We would really recommend you stick to a good, 7 to 10 pages. There's a lot of information you can convey. For example, Y Combinator demo days, when they pitch, it's usually 5 pages, 5 pages max, and there's maybe 3 sentences or 3 sets of numbers on each page, and there's not much more.
Bear in mind, there's a very big difference between pitching a deck and sending one in to be read. The two things are different, so do bear that in mind, because if you're sending it to someone to read, it can contain more information and it can be longer.
Yeah, exactly. Or if you want to keep the same deck, which, if you think that the deck tells a good story, regardless of whether it's being pitched or read, but you feel like a little bit more context would be helpful. What's also good is creating a really good cover note or a 1-pager to go with the deck that somebody can read first, and then they can read the deck and get the story kind of filled out from that. One other thing to say kind of early on is your titles, what you have at the top of the page, they shouldn't just be, they can be problem statements, solution, etc., but they can also be used. It's very good real estate on a slide in terms of space that can tell a really good story. So the tip we used to get when we were putting together slide decks as analysts is, if you can tell the story of the whole presentation just by reading the titles of the slides, that can really help. That can really help things along. Okay. So once you've gotten the problem statement out of the way, how are you going to solve the problem? And what are the key business drivers? I think every business, again, simplicity, clarity, succinctness are your friends, right? If you can boil down why your business model works to 1 or 2 points, that's brilliant. That's exactly what you should be aiming for. And if you can't, you should probably reconsider whether you've designed the right business model, because if it's very difficult to explain, or if it's quite complicated, even for something that's, for example, a 2-sided marketplace or a B2B2C model, there still should be a simple way to explain what you do. If you can't explain what you do in 10 or 15 seconds, the classic elevator pitch, or the 1-2 generous minutes that we suggested here when you're pitching this at a competition, then again, you should go back and review, because somewhere something is going to be too complicated, not to explain, but actually for you to execute. And so it's a good time to step back and think about what is it here that we're making too complicated. Hannah, anything on that point? No. And then again, for your total addressable market, there's so many different ways to present this. There's so many different ways to show this. And again, as we said, after the opening statement and the problem statement and an outline of your solution, there's different ways to organize a presentation. So this can really come at any point, but people need to know you're going after a big enough problem. Put yourself into the investor's shoes. If you're pitching to angel investors, then maybe they will be excited about what you're building based on an emotional hook. Maybe they had a similar problem. Maybe they just want to invest into a nice business or a business that they believe in. If you're pitching to a venture capital firm, they need to make a return on every investment. They need to be able to convince the investment committee that they will be able to make a return on every check that they write. That's at least 10x of the investment. Of the valuation that they're investing in. That means that you need to be able to go after a big market. And you can't say that I'm going after a smaller market than my competitors, or, you can say you're going after a slice of the market, but you need to be really clear how you slice it up. And you need to be also consider what penetration of that market is actually achievable. We've seen a lot of people show us, I don't know, the market is 2 billion and I'm going to get 100 million of it. That's just not realistic. If the market's 2 billion, you're not going to get 100 million of it, because by the time you get a little bit of traction, a ton of copycats will start, a ton of other people will come and copy what you're doing. And there's very little, proof or, data that shows that you'll actually be able, on average, have that massive land grab. So don't pitch yourself as an outlier straight away. Just show sensible numbers. There's always a good way to tell a story, and make sure that you have a very clear one. Again, to build, in terms of building this addressable market point, these data points can be built in many different ways. Just make sure you have a very clear and simple way, with references, with sources, to get to that data. Again, one thing I haven't mentioned yet, but sources are really important, especially for data, especially for market data. So don't be scared of putting sources on the page, or sending, showing where you got data from, because people will ask, and if they can't read it, then they'll definitely ask you the question, and they'll reference and they'll drill down and they'll check. Don't assume that that no one's going to question you on the numbers that you show. So once you've gotten, the next logical step is, you're very excited about building this business. There's a real reason you're going after this problem. What have you done to figure out if it actually has any traction, if it works? And the answer that, well, I haven't gotten any funding yet, so I haven't built an MVP, and I don't know if and I haven't had I haven't been able to figure out if my customers, or test this with any customers because I don't have an MVP. That's not the answer that anyone's looking for. What people are looking for is, okay, so yeah, I need funding to build a real product, but I've spoken to, 1,000 people, or 200 really high quality, representative customers, and I have a waiting list of individuals who want to use this. And there's different ways to build that up without actually needing investment or actually building anything before. There's lots of ways to test out a market. And so the most important thing is to show the individual, because again, all of this is just an extended interview when someone is investing in you, for a very long relationship where they're going to be observing how you work and how you hit your targets. And if you start off by saying that I need the money first before I do anything, that's not going to go very far. People need to be convinced that you have the hustle and the drive to do the work, and the conviction that you're going to do it anyway. You're going to find a way to do it anyway. So minimum viable product and traction, I would say, if you have a minimum viable product, that's great. Describe it, explain what the feedback was, who's used it, what conversations have you had, what are the customer stories, who's your target customer. Be really clear about that, because if you're clear about that, then someone who you're speaking to has conviction that you really understand what you're selling. If you're not clear who you're selling to, you're not going to sell it very well, and you're not going to design the product very well in its later stages. Another way to demonstrate that you understand, or you think, or kind of what your traction could look like, is building up a pipeline. So maybe individuals that you've spoken to, that you obviously haven't sent the product to yet, but people who want to do pilots with you, have signed LOIs with you, or have said that they will if you bring them something that they can actually look at. And within that you've understood what the sales cycles for those people look like. So if they're individuals, of course, for consumer, it's very different from a business sales cycle. For consumer, if you convince them to pay your subscription fee or to use your app, they're on board, right? But for a business sales cycle, if you're selling into, I don't know, a regular company, maybe it's 3 months, maybe it's a month if you're lucky. If you're selling into hospitals, or if you're selling into large, complex, multi-layered organizations, could be 12 months, could be longer. So you need to have a real clarity on what that looks like. And then, as Hannah mentioned, product overview, user journey is also super important. Even if you haven't built it yet, and a vision of how it's going to work, what it's going to do, what the user journey is going to be, whether that's a consumer or a business user, is really important. And on your go-to-market, again, all of the above really fits into it. So have you considered what the sales cycle is going to look like? Have you mapped out who you need to go after? That's the kind of work. And again, when you do this work, it's not for the funding competition, and it's not for the investor in the end of the day. It's mostly for yourself, because you really need to, it's first and foremost for yourself. You need to prove to yourself that this is actually doable. And if you go in and do this, properly, with kind of sleeves rolled up and really test everything out, then, that's why experienced entrepreneurs, for example, they give themselves 6 to 12 months and, 2 to 3 ideas to ideate on, and then they cull ideas as they go, because they're like, okay, well, we did a sprint working on this for 6 weeks or 8 weeks, and we realized it doesn't work for this reason, because either technically it's not possible, or we went out to a few test customers, and realized they didn't really have the problem we thought they did, or there was another reason. And so they're pragmatic. They realize that they might have a vision around something, and they might think there's a problem that exists, but until the market validates it, it's just your idea. And if you can't get anybody else on board, it's still just your idea, because you won't have any paying customers. You can, of course, say that you're a Steve Jobs and you know what people need before they know that they need it, and maybe that's true. But again, if you have that strength of vision, have real clarity of when you're conveying it, because you need to convince people to get behind your vision when probably very few people will see it. And I'm not saying it's not possible, of course it is, but but there's also method to the madness sometimes. Hannah, sorry, do you have anything? I've realized I just talked through the whole slide.
No, carry on.
Okay.
Guys, I think we just got one question just come in, if you wanted to pause.
Sure. Yeah, we can answer questions.
Okay, so Edward, thanks Edward. When gauging interest in your product or service to build this waiting list, is this about understanding if these potential customers like what you are selling, or more about actually getting them to agree a price point they would actually purchase at?
It can be either. So if it's if you're creating a product that needs a payment, it's what purchase price or what price point are they sensitive around? What would make sense as a price point for them? So getting that data, and getting that data supported by several multiple customer interviews. If you're building something that has, let's say, a launch date, and people want to hear when that is, so just telling people that, I have 100 people on my probably a bit more on my distribution list who are waiting for me to announce this product because they want to be early users. So there's multiple ways to demonstrate it. It's there's no really one way. It really depends on what you're trying to build.
I would add to that and say your waiting list is to demonstrate demand for the product, and I don't think that necessarily needs to be attached to a certain price point. I think that's more validating that there's demand for the concept and the product itself. But you do, as Veronika says, you do need to validate that price point somehow. And whether that's through a survey you've been doing, like a survey you carry out in your product design phase, or otherwise, you could benchmark the price of it depending on how unique your product or service is. If it's not that unique and there are proxies or benchmarks for that kind of product in the market, so say it's a sock, say you design a new type of sock, and you know that most socks in the market sell for £4 or £5. Like, you can have that data in there and say, this is how you've compared your product to what's out there in the market already. So for the waiting list, I think that's more just about building up your customer base and proving traction.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
So I guess why are you putting all these things together really is to bring it to a close. And the close is really important in a pitch. The close is the ask. Why am I here listening to you? Why am I here listening to this idea? And the reason I'm here is because you need to ask me something, and it's just the best thing to do is to come out and ask. So I mean, obviously in a funding competition, it's clear what the ask is. You're trying to win a funding competition, but if you're meeting an investor, the only ask doesn't have to be their money. You can also say, look, I'm hiring I'm looking to hire a really good CTO. Do you know anybody who could be interested in this problem that I'm trying to solve? I've built up my MVP, but I would love early testers. You seem to really understand the problem. Let's say if they say they're not ready to fund you, would you be willing to be on our beta testing list? I'm looking into new marketing channels, and I know that you're fund or that you personally have a lot of experience in marketing. Would you be able to mentor us around our marketing strategy / put us in touch with the right PR firms? We're building a fintech, and you have a ton of experience in finance or regulations, or you're an exited fintech founder, or you're a fintech focused fund. Can you advise us whether we have the regulatory ideas down correctly? Like, are these the licenses that we need? I mean, there's so many ways that you can have a conversation with investors, and it's not only about money, and money is obviously a good place to start, and you should definitely be very clear about what you're asking for. Is it how much? Have an idea of valuation, and definitely explain kind of why you're raising the capital. If you're just saying we need the money because you need to have strong reasons for any kind of ask. If you say $500,000 just because we need $500,000, that's not good enough. $500,000 because we need to hire a team, ideate and do a few things, that's a little bit better. Or we need to invest in certain things, that's also a little bit better. So I guess that's really, let me see how much more yes. So the last kind of list that we want to go through with you is general advice. So clear, simple language, really, really make it very, very transparent. Less is more. I did a communication workshop recently, and I realized that, unless you speak in very clear, concise sentences, people have real trouble remembering. Even those that are speaking the same language, know you well, have real trouble, repeating back to you what you've just said. It's quite difficult. So less is more. Be specific, avoid vague statements. Always, I've seen a lot of pitches, especially out of academic institutions, where it just looks like somebody took their PhD or their dissertation and converted it to slides, both in number of words and in the complexity of the ideas they're trying to put forward. And, perhaps I'm just not smart enough to understand some of this or what they were saying, but, if you can't explain to me what you are trying to build and show me some practical results around it, it's very unusual that a early stage investor, unless they're specialized in your field, will be excited about what you do. Only use numbers that you're sure of and can defend. A lot of people like to put forward sometimes a 5-year or 10-year P&L statement. Doesn't get early stage investors excited. Show a 12-month plan with 3-year target, with 3-month targets, interim targets, and numbers that you really can defend. So in the first 3 months, we're going after these 2 clients. Then we're going to go after the following 5. Then we're going to grow to 10. This is how we're going to do it. That clarity shows that you have a plan, and because of the clarity, it shows that you can execute on that plan. If you're using charts, make them clear and very simple to read. Don't exaggerate, and please leave time for some Q&A, because people will have a lot of questions.
On that note, I think we have another question. Ed, you're winning the questions today. Specific question for Edward. I am pitching for Aspect in 2 weeks. Our roadmap doesn't currently include looking for funding for another 6 months. Is that an appropriate ask, or would you go down a different ask route?
I think if you're not looking for funding, there's no reason to ask for funding. But if you're looking for individuals to, I guess my question is, why are you pitching? Oh, you're pitching to get into Aspect. Sorry,
No, we're pitching for Aspect Demo Day. I mean, it's just for Aspect. I don't know if there is like a specific. You just do it at the end of Aspect, right?
But I'm assuming investors will be at that demo day, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, investors are there.
but you're not looking for funding. You just want people to know that what you're building, about what you're building.
I would take out the ask and just have your roadmap and just leave it there.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I thought I'd ask because it was something that we haven't got in our like presentation. Like if we when we've applied for other like areas, we've like used a specific ask. If we were applying for a competition or something, like we would be like, this is what we want the money for. But with this, it's like we don't actually have a specific need now. I mean, I guess it begs the question why. I agree, but it's more like we are pitching for Aspect Demo Day. It's not like, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about it if you don't have a specific ask, then just do your presentation, put your roadmap, and say thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Or everyone just Fridayed out?
I have a question, if I may.
Yeah,
it's just style. So I'm a former management consultant. I think it comes across in my presentation styles. I like to give everything a point and a reference and so forth. And it seems a lot of investor decks are just very graphical with one statement, and as in a really kind of bold number or something. And it just feels a bit different from what I'm used to. But what's your experience and suggestion around style of presentation deck?
It's a great question. I'll tell you my view, and then I think Hannah will probably have a different view, but which will prove my point. Depends on your audience. It really, really depends who you're speaking to. If you, for example, if you're speaking at a venture funding competition with a lot of VCs in the audience, graphical with one kind of statement on each page, or especially an American audience, definitely wins every time, because clarity, and you can give the story as you're speaking. If you're speaking to a private equity, high net worth angel who likes where you kind of the segment that you're trying to build a product in or a solution in, come with consulting style slides and maybe send them in advance, because they want to see detail, they want to see numbers, and it really depends on who your audience is, I would say. And maybe the answer is, as Hannah said earlier, have two decks. Have a deck that you pitch and a deck that you send.
I definitely think if you're sending a deck to someone for them to read, you want to put some material on it. The most annoying thing is when someone sends you a deck to read that it's kind of got statements and not really any detail there. So, but there's a balance, and I think I shared a couple of links last time to example decks online, of which there are lots out there of examples. But for your pitching, if you're talking to the slides, then they want to be light on words, because you should speak to that, but also if there's loads of content on a slide, then the people you're pitching to are going to be either reading the slides and not listening to you, or they're going to be distracted, and you want them to be like 100% laser focused on what you're saying.
Thank you both.
I don't know if I made it any clearer.
I have a question for you as well, if you don't mind it. I'll jump in. Thank you both so much for the presentation. This has been fantastic, and lots of really, really good info in there. Wondering, so I've been working on a two-sided marketplace concept, and wondering if you have any recommendations on how to present, especially the early section around problem and solution, without becoming overly cumbersome and without having to tell two sort of separate and distinct stories.
It's an excellent question. What I would say is really anything for two-sided marketplace, look at how, actually Airbnb didn't have a great early deck, so I can't point you back to Airbnb, but try and do a slide, kind of a high-level slide on both sides of the marketplace and how the engine works, and then delve into the two separate, and then tell people how you're going to tell the story so that you can explain how each side engages. But what I really find personally helpful is having a visual of how the marketplaces come together, and what your solution does. Because if I don't, I find it quite hard to, if I'm just trying to follow the narrative of how you're explaining it, I find maybe just because I'm a visual person, but I find it difficult to then try and fully understand how it integrates. So maybe have a schematic or something visual to kick off with, and then delve into the detail. Hannah, I don't know if you agree.
No, I think it's the same. I think probably in every marketplace, the opportunity is where it fits both sides, right? Where the opportunity is those two sides come together and the thing happens. Wow, it's Friday.
Magic.
I can definitely tell with my vocab. But yeah, having a slide that demonstrates that is really helpful. I would also say, if you haven't read any of Andrew Chen's work on writing on marketplaces, he's written a ton. He's from Andreessen, and the other fund that's worth looking at for content, and like look what they look for and metrics and all that stuff is 0.9 Capital. They've got a lot of online articles, so they might, in reading some of that stuff, it might give you some idea about how to frame it.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you.
I guess, sorry, just one more point on that. I think you said, how can you do it in a way that's not cumbersome? But at the end of the day, the problem with marketplaces is that you need to have both sides in order for it to work. And if you don't have that, then that's a problem. So I wouldn't be too worried about actually being clear about the need on both sides of the marketplace, and actually, describing that in not obviously detail, but that's if you're pitching to investors, that's going to be one of the key kind of concerns. So I would kind of go a bit heavier on that.
And I think the key to echo that, the key thing they'll be looking for is an explanation of your go-to-market. So it's less of, so really explaining how you're going to capture, or the key thing about two-sided marketplaces is exactly the point, like that you need both of them to exist before revenue can be generated. So how do you get them onboarded simultaneously, or is there one? What's going to lead, demand or supply? And I think that's a really important thing to decide, and have conviction around. Even if you need to change it later because you'll get out into the field and you'll find something different, but it's obviously one will always be a function of the other. If there's not enough houses on Airbnb, it can't have too many users, and that's exactly what it was in the beginning. Same with Uber, same with every other two-sided marketplace. Fat Llama in London more recently, that's another good one to look at. Investment by Blossom Capital, but otherwise, yeah, it's I think that articulation is going to be quite key.
Thank you. There's a question that's just come in. I think Arthur wants the insider knowledge about your funds. So when you're going to be launching, in which stages you're going to be invested, a little bit more about your current projects.
Perfect. So we're in exactly the same boat as you guys. We're fundraising. So we are, we definitely have to practice what we preach, in terms of how we present our material and how we go about explaining what we do. So our mandate will be to invest in students and alumni of the LSE. So one of the founders of C-Suite has to be from the LSE, and we'll invest at seed and Series A. We're still fundraising, so we're not deploying at the moment, but we do want to start meeting founders from, frankly, the idea stage, and we want to start offering support from that stage. So if any of, we're looking forward to seeing you guys at Demo Day. We'll be at the Aspect Demo Day, and we'll obviously be involved in the next accelerator. So it's one of the key things that we love about what we do. We get to see things super early. Yeah, in a nutshell, that's who we are.
Thank you. Any other questions about the pitch deck or anything else that you wanted to ask Hannah and Veronika? Friday afternoon. I was thinking, what the heck were we thinking putting on an event on a Friday afternoon during lockdown when everyone is on dry January? But well done, you guys, for turning up, and what a brilliant effort. And from you guys is so informative. And as I said, we've got the recording, so I'll send that out to you. And if you know anyone that you think could really do with looking at this. Oh, sorry, Tina, we've got a question quick. Tina. How do expectations for initial idea versus developed idea differ?
Great question, Tina. I think for initial idea, we're looking for the 3-month plan, the 6-month plan. You need to have really clear you need to articulate really clearly what you need in terms of teams. So you don't need to have a full team assembled or a full idea developed, but the next steps and clarity around next steps is really important. Develop the idea. We're looking for a bit of traction. We're looking for maybe the 12-month plan, and we're looking for the team to be a bit more built out. Hannah, any more things on that? You're on mute.
No. No, nothing to add.
Yeah, it's more, the initial idea is much more about, okay, this is what I think is going to work really well. I'm beginning to get more people on board, but it's still super early days, so much less material. I mean, you definitely need a market. You definitely need, so if we go back to this, you still need the problem statement. Why now? You need points 1, 2. An idea of free, but maybe you can say that you're still, A/B testing which revenue models really make sense. 4, again, but saying that potentially there might be slight differences depending on which part of the addressable market you go after. 5 is probably less developed, but you might have a few key proof points that decided why you wanted to do this in the first place. You need to know 6. You might not need to present 6, but you need to know 6. And for the team, again, you might not have a full team, but you need to have a really clear idea for what you need for the team. So you need to know what you're good at, what you want to do and keep doing once the company's launched, and then who you want to hire to help you.
I think the important thing is around ideas is, I mean, ideas is a funny word, right? Because what stage of idea? But I think really demonstrate that you've done your thinking, at least, even if you haven't been able to get out there and talk to people, the fact that you've done like desk-based research, you've spoken to a couple of people, maybe, like, I think just a demonstration that you've given it some thought, and it's not just kind of scrawled on the back of a napkin and posted through someone's letterbox. I don't know if anyone's ever done that. I haven't, but there's an idea.
I mean, I think one thing we see quite often, which even with developed teams, which really surprises us, is there are a lot of tools that are free. LinkedIn is free. If you decide to get a sales navigator, it's a bit more expensive, but it's the base. There's a lot of basic tools where you can find a ton of information. And if you know that your target market is supermarket business development execs because you're creating a new shopping platform, for example, last mile delivery startup. Mapping that out isn't difficult because a lot of the information is online. So just doing, as Hannah said, doing a lot of the work that you're able to do in advance and being armed with that is pretty key. And you can find so much on LinkedIn. It's really there's a lot of things you can do in terms of and really try and figure out kind of how you're going to go after your target people.
And so I'm sure I don't know if everyone on here is an LSE alum, not that it really matters, but Veronika and I have spent the last year or so basically talking to LSE alumni, and what we found is that people are so receptive to conversations. So if you find someone who's working in your industry, or they've founded a company, or they work for Deloitte in consumer or retail or whatever, ping them a note and say, I'm working on this and I'd love to jump on a 15-20 minute chat, or I would say grab coffee, but can't do that anymore. But people genuinely, I think, are keen to support, and they like to feel flattered, and they like to feel that they've got something that they can share. So definitely don't feel shy about doing that.
But even in lockdown, don't feel shy about asking for a call. It's amazing how many people are stuck at home. Well, not amazing. It's a lot of people are stuck at home. There's nothing else to do, and genuinely, you can get a hold of a ton of people you generally wouldn't be able to get a hold of. So, do it. You have nothing to lose. Be proactive. Be ambitious in terms of who you reach out to. And if in the end you have a great conversation, honestly, sometimes it's 1 or 2 conversations, and that person can be on your advisory board. And if you can show that on a slide, why not? It's a great way to show that you've been ambitious and proactive in terms of your outreach. And frankly, if anything, those that plus hustle are probably the 2 skills that you really need when you're starting a company. A lot of other things you can figure out.